Thank you so much for having me today. What I'm going to do is I've got a PowerPoint, actually slides. First time I'm using Google Slides, first time I'm presenting virtually, so bear with me. Also, just to make it even more fun, we've embedded a video in this, so you know this could go really well or it could just crash and burn. So I'm glad it's being recorded, so we'll have that for future reference. Um, and just as a little bit of background, I'm, as Jeff mentioned, I'm Tina Jackson. I am a species conservation coordinator with Colorado Parks and Wildlife. And what that means is I deal with non-game, threatened and endangered special concern species. And one of the groups that I deal with is native bats. So that's what we're going to focus on today. But I do also, in your guys' realm, I do also deal with both of our listed jumping mice. I deal with black-tailed prairie dogs and black-footed ferrets, and then all of our reptile species. So those are some other things. If we have time at the end, if you want to ask me anything about those, I'm happy to answer them. But once I switch over to my slides, I don't think there's a way that I'll be seeing the chat. So I've asked Jeff to kind of speak up if something comes up in the chat while I'm giving the slides, and that way we'll be able to address it then as needed. So definitely ask questions. I kept this kind of high level, and there's certainly portions of it that you guys are going to know more about than I do, but the bats I do understand. So if nothing has come in, we'll switch over to the slides. Hopefully it works. Let's see, share and present from beginning. Okay, because we can't talk about bats without all of the fun issues. And actually, let me start. Jeff, are you guys seeing the slides?
Yes, we are.
Perfect. Okay. There's so many fun things to talk about with bats. You know, I can't just give it a normal title. So Beyond the Bat Cave came to mind. You know, we always think bats roost in caves, but here in Colorado, we actually don't have that many caves. And in the caves we have, we don't see a lot of bat roosting. So we've had to be a little creative on figuring out where our bats are actually roosting. And one of the things we know is we've got them roosting in bridges. So it kind of brings up the question, why look for bat use in bridges? What is the importance of that? And Jeff touched on a few things, but one of the first things for us is we have this overarching plan. If you haven't seen it, it's really interesting in a geeky sort of way, but it's called the State Wildlife Action Plan. It's available on our website. Within the State Wildlife Action Plan, we have identified species of greatest conservation need. So it's kind of a new name for species of special concern. So these are species, they can be listed either federally or at the state level, but they're also just species that we feel work needs to be done on. And they are split into two tiers. Tier 1 of the State Wildlife Action Plan are those species that we at CPW are really focused on doing things with. We feel that there are some threats and actions that really need immediate addressing. And then Tier 2 are those other species that are of conservation need. We aren't really putting a lot of effort towards them yet, but that might change in the future. And so on the State Wildlife Action Plan, we actually have four bat species that are Tier 1, and that'd be our fringed myotis, our little brown bat, our spotted bat, and our Townsend's big-eared bat. And then on our Tier 2 is the Allen's big-eared, the big free-tailed, and the hoary bat. They're all on there for different reasons. There's different threats that they're facing, different actions we feel need to be taken. As far as ESA, Endangered Species Act listing, we don't currently have any bats in the state that are federally listed or state listed for that matter. But both the little brown bat and the tricolored bat are currently being reviewed for listing federally. Both of those are being reviewed because of impacts from white nose syndrome. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about white nose syndrome in this presentation, but for those that don't know, white nose syndrome is a fungal disease that's impacting bats across North America, and it has made it, and it initially showed up in New York State, and it has made it as far as Wyoming. Because of the Wyoming detection, I have become a strong supporter of wall building. I think we need a very, very tall wall on the north border. If you guys can help me with that at all, I'm definitely behind that sort of construction project. Some other threats that our bats are potentially facing are wind energy development. There's a lot of impacts when we put up wind towers, wind turbines, to bat species. Roost disturbance is a significant threat in certain parts of the state. And then just general lack of knowledge is something that we list in the State Wildlife Action Plan as a threat and an action we need to address. For a lot of our bat species, we just don't know where they are. We don't know what sorts of habitats they're using, and we don't know if they're having an issue. So the other big reason, and what addresses a lot of these things that I've mentioned, is just identification of these roosts. And it's very interesting, even within Parks and Wildlife, how many people don't understand that we don't know that where the bats are roosting. Bats are small, they're fast, they're flyers, and they come out at night. So those are all things that make it very difficult to determine where they're spending their summers and where they're hibernating in the wintertime. So identification of roosts across the state is something that's a high priority for us, and we're trying to do that more. So that's where we came up with this idea of reaching out to you guys and figuring out if you are seeing bat use in bridges. Oh, so why would a bat actually use a bridge? There's a lot of different types of roosts and a lot of different resources that bridges can bring to bats looking for a roost. The really important thing that we're looking for across the state are things called maternity roosts, and this is where female bats congregate together and they raise their pups over the summertime. These roosts can be quite large. We have a number of roosts across the state that we monitor that are maternity roosts. These roosts are also very important for us because they are, in most cases, the largest roosts we have in the state, even compared to our winter hibernation sites. They're a site that we can monitor for long-term population stability in different species. They're very important roosts for us. The downside of maternity roosts is when we're dealing with white nose syndrome, maternity roosts are summer roosts. White nose syndrome is an impact that the bats have in the wintertime. So they raise a little bit of a concern in monitoring for white nose syndrome. There's other sorts of roosts. We call them day roosts. During the summertime, a bat sleeps during the day. I think everyone knows that from watching Batman. But they may not be in a maternity roost. So animals that are using other day roosts may be females that didn't reproduce, maybe solitary males, maybe young after they leave a roost. So there's a lot of reasons there'd be other day roosts. And these can be everything from hiding behind the shutters on a house, roosting in a tree, roosting, and I had an email this morning of 2 bats roosting in a patio umbrella. So that would be a day roost. So we also have transition season roosts. So these are roosts that are used as bats are moving from their summer site to their winter site, and from their winter site back to their summer site. So these are typically fall and spring roosts. They're not necessarily used for a very long time. Bachelor roosts are kind of the male equivalent of those maternity roosts. So during the summertime, when all the females get together to raise pups, the males often will go off into a roost of just males in other areas. And then night roosts are used for very short periods of time during the night. The bats come out in the evening, they start feeding, they eat a lot, need to take a break while they digest that food and rest, and then they'll go out and feed some more. So these can be even things like just a pole on a patio can be a night roost. And then other types of roosts, hibernacula, where they spend the winter, is one of those. We don't believe that any of our bats would be using bridges as hibernation sites, but it's certainly something we would look into. The picture I've got here is of Townsend's big ear bat colony in the Tomb, the I-70 bridge area. There's a Townsend's big ear bat maternity colony, I believe, in there is what I've heard. So that's what this picture here is.
Hey, Tina?
Yeah.
Joseph McGuire, I want to know what the wall you referred to is for.
What the wall?
You said you were in favor of building a wall on the northern side.
A very tall wall on the north border to keep those Wyoming bats that are infected with white nose syndrome from coming south.
Okay.
I'm controlling immigration from Wyoming.
Okay, thanks.
Sorry, was a joke that probably didn't go over very well. but it would have to be very tall, just so everyone knows, and have no holes in it whatsoever. Okay, any other questions, Jeff?
No, that's the only one so far.
Okay, um, so also, why do bats use bridges? So that was the type of roost that they would use them for. Some of the reasons they would actually use bridges to fulfill those needs for roosts are, we may have a lack of natural roosts. There may be areas of the state where there aren't caves and mines, or the other sorts of structures out on the landscape don't provide the temperature or the humidity levels that the bats are looking for to meet their needs. So they may turn to a bridge that's actually providing those things. And some of those resources that they're looking for are temperature, shelter from predators and from the environment, access to water and insects. Those are very important to bats. And then bridges just may be one of those things that they find when they're moving around. So just to go through these a little bit more in depth, temperature is very important to bats at all times of the year. They're a very small animal that has a large surface area. Those wings make up a large portion of their body. And so it's very important that they find the right temperatures and humidities to roost in. If they're roosting in some place that is too cold, they have to spend a lot of energy to keep their temperature up. If they're roosting in a place that the humidity level isn't high enough, they're going to have to spend a lot of energy to keep getting the water resources that they need. So a maternity roost is often a very, very warm site. We have a couple of maternity roosts across the state that we've put temperature loggers in, and they're averaging about 120 degrees Fahrenheit. So bats want it to stay very warm because that helps them to not have to spend those energy reserves to keep their temperatures up. Shelter is very important. Shelter from predators. Again, bats are small. Lots of things like to eat them. So when you're sleeping all day long, all those daytime predators that might be out there, you want to make sure you're out of reach of them. And that's where like a roost in a bridge can come in very handy. You're not going to get a predator getting into those little cracks that they're roosting in. And it's also part of the reason they roost up high. If you roost on the ground, you're more likely to run into a terrestrial predator. Water and insects. When they wake up in the evening, one of the first things they do is get a drink of water, much like us when we wake up in the morning. And then insects, all of our bats in Colorado are insect eaters. We don't get any of the pollinating or fruit eating bats. So they are looking for places where they're going to find good insects. So bridges are a great example of that. You have a bridge over a river, you've got immediate access to water, and you've got insects using those wet areas. So those are great resources. You don't have to fly a mile to get to your water and your food. And then bats are moving around the landscape a lot, and bridges are just something they'll bump into. They're, like I said, they're in their feeding areas, and that's where these things like transition roosts or other day roosts or even night roosts, where they just need some place to rest while they digest their food in the middle of the night, that's where bridges might come in handy for that. The picture here, I stole off the internet from Atlas Obscura. This is the really well-known Mexican or Brazilian free-tailed bat outflight at the Congress Street Bridge in Austin. This species is really interesting. That roost is a maternity roost, and it is, I believe, about 1 billion bats. It's a huge number, whatever it is. And as the pups start to fly, it almost doubles in size. We have a few roosts of this species up here, but our best roost for this species is actually a bachelor roost in the San Luis Valley. They're using an old abandoned mine, and we have about 250,000 male bats that hang out in there all summer long. So if you're looking for a neat bat flyout, that's a fun one to go visit. Okay, so which bats use bridges? I believe on my next slide, I may have taken it out altogether. In Colorado, we typically say we have about 18 or 19 bat species. There's a couple of them that we haven't completely confirmed are in the state, so we can't really nail that number down. When I put this little spreadsheet on here, I realized there's 21, and I haven't been able to figure out who is in here that shouldn't be. So anyway, but this is a list of our bat species in the state. And then the column to the right is where we know or suspect they might be using bridges. So for the pallid bat, they're likely using bridges as a night roost, so just kind of a transitory roost. As I said, we do have that Townsend's bigger colony in the I-70 tomb. Big brown bat likely using them as a night roost. We've got a couple of species that it's probably not likely that they would use a bridge, and that's just because of the type of roosting or the amount of individuals we have in the state. The spotted bat is pretty rare in Colorado. The silver-haired, the red bats, and the hoary bat are tree roosting bats, so they like to roost kind of individually, like to use trees. So bridges probably aren't something they're going to be super interested in. But all of our myota species are something that we suspect most of them would at least use bridges at some point. We do have a day roost of Yuma myotis, and then we also have a roost over in the Grand Junction area of the Mexican free-tailed bats, using, I believe that's a maternity colony in a bridge. So I love this picture. If I tell you what species it is, I'm gonna totally get it wrong, but I think that's a really cute picture of one of our big-eared bats. Everyone thinks bats are kind of scary and ugly. I think they're super cute. Here's a few more of our pictures. I always like to throw a picture of a spotted bat in there just because they're one of the few bats I can identify from a picture. But as you can see, most of our bats are hard to identify. Two species from pictures. There's a few of them that we can. So that's one thing as we go through this. When you're out there looking at bridges, we're not going to ask you to try to tell us which sort of bat you're seeing. Mostly what we're trying to get to is there some indication that there's bats? And then we'll go out and do some acoustic work or netting to actually figure out who we're seeing. And just for scale, most of our bat species in the state, because you can't get it from these close-up pictures, they're only about 3 inches tall, wingspans between about 8 and maybe 14 inches. So not very big animals. So then we get to kind of the meat of our conversation today. So is a bat using this bridge? You know, if you go into a bridge, again, I believe this is a picture from inside the tomb. You go into a bridge area, you go up to a bridge, you see a bat. That's clear indication that yes, bats are using this bridge. So you can see that little bat roosting there under the light. But some of the things that we would just look for are guano. For those that don't do a lot with bats, you may not know, guano is bat poop. And we will talk a little bit more about that. I've got a fun little video, hopefully, that'll work on bat guano. Visual observations. Sometimes when you look up into cracks and crevices, you can see little bat noses peeking back at you. That's a good indication. Squeaking. Some of our bats, when they're roosting, you'll actually hear little squeaking sounds. So that can be something that we would use to say we're going to follow up on this and see if we can capture anyone coming out. Smell very often goes along with guano. I'll show you some pictures here in a minute of pretty significant size roost and the amount of guano that sits underneath that. If we're getting a lot of guano, we're actually going to smell the bats. And all of these can vary by roost type and by size. So our maternity roosts, as I said earlier, are going to be those bigger roosts. But a night roost is something that the bat's not there for very long. So we may not see a lot of guano. We may not actually get visual observations. You may not pick up a smell because the bats aren't there for very long. So these can definitely vary. So here's an example. This is, I'm gonna totally forget which bridge this is. This is over in Grand Junction, and there is a maternity roost in this bridge. And as you can see on these pictures, we've got those strips of dark color that match up to the cracks in the bridge. That is guano. And so when you go under this bridge on a nice warm day, you can tell there are bats in the area. You can definitely smell this. So this is a pretty good example and of one of the observations that we would be interested in knowing about. this is also the sort of roost that we're really interested in monitoring, because when you're seeing guano levels like this, we most likely have pretty consistent use and we have a number of bats in there. So this would be something we're very interested in monitoring from a population level, and just knowing about this roost for other reasons. We would be able to get in there in the early maternity season and do some swabbing for white nose syndrome, make sure we're not seeing any population changes over the years, things like that.
Cinnamon said that's the US 6 overpass, the railroad overpass.
Yes, thank you, Cinnamon. I know you've been out there with Dan. And for scale, in the picture on the right, that is one of our biologists. That's Dan Newbaum. I believe that's Dan standing there. So you can tell these are some pretty good piles of guano. Okay, so here's my video. Let's see if we can make this work. And you will be the first group to actually see this video. Hopefully, you realize how goofy my job can be at times.
Working.
I'm Tina Jackson. I'm a species conservation coordinator with Colorado Parks and Wildlife, and one of the groups of species I deal with is bats. And a very common question I get is, do I have bats in this building or in this structure or around my house? And one easy way to tell is to look at the guano. So guano is a fancy science word for bat poop. And one thing to do is compare it with another species that is pretty common around human buildings and structures, and that's mice. So today I brought with me an example of some bat guano and some mouse poop, mouse droppings, or mouse scat, you could call it. And you can tell there's a little bit of a difference in the size. This is probably the biggest piece of bat guano I have, and here's kind of a comparable piece of mouse scat. And there's also a little bit of a difference in shape. In mice, you're going to see a little bit of a pointed end to the dropping, whereas the bat is usually very rounded. But my favorite way to tell the difference is to actually crumble them. When you crumble them, the bat guano is going to crumble into a very fine dust, and it sparkles. I think that is very cool about bats, that they produce sparkly poop. And the reason for this is that bats are primarily insect eaters, and the exoskeletons of insects are hard to digest, and they sparkle themselves. If you see a beetle or you see a moth flying around, you see that shimmer on their wings or their in essence skin, and that's what you're picking up in that bat poop. So I brought some gloves so that we can do this. So we're going to start with the mouse droppings. And as you'll see, the mouse droppings, they don't go into a fine powder like we get with the bat poop, or the bat guano that we'll see in just a minute. Good. So here's that bat guano. And I'm just rubbing it between my fingers. You can see we get a very fine, almost dust. And if I've got enough of it there, you should be able to see the sparkles. And it's helpful when you're looking for that to have a really good light nearby, and sometimes just to move your hand around a little bit to see if you can pick those little fine sparkles up. The other thing you will notice sometimes is mouse droppings are very often scattered around. If you've ever had a mouse in your garage, you see they leave it along an edge and things like that. But with bat guano, they very often, what's happening is they're roosting in a location, and those droppings are falling below where they're roosting. So you'll see them kind of piled up in areas because that's where the roost occurs, that's where the clump of bats is. Sometimes you'll even, if you're at a bridge structure or beams in like a old barn, you'll see the bats are lined up, so you'll see just lines of guano underneath. So that's it for the difference between bat guano and mouse droppings. But if you have any questions, please get in touch with your local Colorado Parks and Wildlife office, and we'll be happy to answer them.
Okay, so now that I'm completely horrified, and I realized we did that as a video because actually showing that on a web platform like this, it was going to be very difficult. And it is very difficult in even a video to pick up that sparkle. But if you're at all interested and you come across some guano and you want to play with it in your fingers, you can actually see that it is pretty cool. You also don't need to do this with your fingers. You can do this with your toe of your boot, use a stick, or even just if you're seeing those lines of guano under a bridge, that's a mouse is not going to leave that. Those pictures that we saw in that previous slide. Are you seeing the slides again, Jeff?
Yes, we are.
Perfect. As you see in here, you're not going to get that sort of look from mice. If we are getting that sort of look from mouse droppings, we have a mouse issue that we probably won't address. So. Okay, so some other signs that you may detect is things we call staining. So this is when the bats are both just oils from their body, but then also I think in this case what we're getting as well is some urine deposition. Over on the left-hand side of this slide, these are the same structure. So that lower picture is looking at this, and I still have, I did not take these pictures and I still haven't quite figured out how this is positioned. I think this is the top of the wall going level, and then when you look into that crack you can actually see a few little bat noses in there. So this is probably some urine that's coming out of that roost. And then over on the right hand side of this picture is what we call insect wrappers. And so what this is these are insect parts that didn't get eaten. They, as you can see with this moth, they took out the yummy part of the moth and they left the wings in the roost. So these are some other examples of things that we might see. An individual moth like this isn't going to be isn't going to say a whole lot about a roost, but when you've got a large roost, you'll start to see a good number of these. It also appears as if there's a couple of pieces of guano tucked in with this. So these can also be things that we would look for at a roost to determine if there might be bats up in there. So here's where we start to get into the stuff I don't know as much about. What type of bat, what type of bridge would a bat be interested in? And these are, in some conversations I've had with some of our biologists, what sorts of bridges around the state we know we have bat use. Culverts, especially if the culverts go underground significantly, they can be used by bats. If they are very well insulated, they could even potentially be used as hibernacula. I don't think we've confirmed any culverts used as hibernacula anywhere in the state, but that is certainly a possibility. Parallel box beam bridges, they're the most common one that we see for maternity colonies in Colorado, but that's just of the maternity colonies we know. So, you know, as we learn about more bridges being used by bats, that might change. Girder bridges are something we see used as night roosts, cast in place bridges as night roosts, and then slab with hollow chamber. And that, I believe, is what the tomb in Glenwood Canyon is, and it's got that Townsend's Big Ear Bat maternity colony in it. I'm sure there are many other types of bridges, and hopefully all of these things make sense to you guys, because they really, I know what a culvert is, but other than that, I'm not that familiar with the other things we're talking about. But here's some examples. All three of these are places we have bats. So that culvert on the left, we do actually have bat use in that site. I believe that's down in the southeast part of the state. The picture in the middle, that's of the tomb in Glenwood Canyon, and then that one on the left is that Highway 6 bridge over outside of Grand Junction. So this is supposed to make sense to you guys. You apparently have a form, a tablet form that you use when you're doing your bridge inspections, and there has been a field added, field 9, that is a yes or no question on whether or not you're seeing anything that would indicate potential bat presence. So you just have to answer yes, that it looks like there might be some bat use of this bridge, or no, it does not look like there's bat use of this bridge. That's really the gist of what we're asking you to do when you're out there looking at the bridges. And Jeff told me this is a required field for the major bridges, minor bridges, and tunnels. So and then once we get that information, what'll happen is Jeff is working with a consultant who will go back to those bridges that get a yes and do a rapid assessment to see is there really bat use at this bridge, and if so, we may either the consultant or CPW staff may go back and do some netting at the site, or put up acoustic detectors to try to figure out what sorts of use might be happening, what sort of species. And I mentioned to Jeff, we are always happy to have you guys come out if you're interested in following up on that. The one thing about that work is it usually happens at night, so we get these great pictures of mist nets set over water, a biologist and some waders, and the Milky Way overhead. So and that is it for my slides. So I am definitely available for questions now. You can also feel free to just give me a holler anytime and ask me any sort of random questions. But Jeff, did we have any questions come in?
No. Does anybody have any questions that have not been answered? I guess not.
Hey, Jeff.
Yeah.
This is Nick. I do have one question on the bridge surveys. So those are like run out of headquarters, is that right? How does that work?
The bridge surveys, we have hired a consultant to do the surveys. And based on those results, we'll contact CPW and see if they want to follow up for more in-depth work.
Okay. I guess I was looking at that form. Actually, I'm just looking at this on my phone, so I couldn't really read the form. Is that like just the general bridge condition surveys, and then there's a field there for them to indicate if there's bats or not? Is that correct, or is this a form that your bat consultant is using?
No, that's just the normal bridge inspection form. They've added a field for suspected bat use, just a yes or no question.
Okay. And I guess they've had training?
This is it.
Okay. All right.
Hi, Tina. This is Jason Triplett. I'm with SCH. We do some of the inspections for CDOT.
Hi.
We tend to run into a lot of wildlife when we're out there. And so I was kind of wondering if there's, like, say, pigeons or other animals like maybe mud swallows, do you tend to see bats in the same area as those, or do they tend to be only with other bats?
Well, they're going to be using different portions of the bridge structure. So the mud swallows, they're building those mud structures outside where the bats are going to go. They're going to tuck themselves into any sorts of cracks and crevices. Sometimes you will get bats roosting out on the outside more as like a night roost sort of thing. But the roosts I know of, I haven't seen a lot of overlap. And I think like if a pigeon were to use, and we kind of grimace to say pigeons are wildlife, but they are in ways. But if a pigeon were to use like a a girder or something on a bridge, that's not necessarily going to be tight enough that a bat's going to be all that interested in it. So I think between those three types of species, you're actually going to see different types of preferences on what sort of bridge they would be using.
Okay. Yeah, I was wondering if it just was something we could just say, well, there's not going to be bats here because X other species is here. So it sounds like we do need to look at those signs that you were talking about with the guano and obviously the sounds too.
Yeah, guano sounds, and honestly, if you just see any little, I don't know how close you are looking at the bridges when you're inspecting them, but if you're looking in all those little cracks and crevices, if you see any little noses peeking back at you, that's most likely a little bat.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah. Part bridge bats may be using. So I see a question here from Kristen about parts of a bridge bats may be using. So what bats typically want to do is tuck into a tight little cavity for the larger roost. So that can be those little and I don't know how to talk about bridges very well. Those little gaps between pieces of cement, the little crevices. If there is any cracking, we may actually see bats will go through a crack into an open space behind it. They typically don't want to be out in the open. So we don't see a lot of use in the open, except for potentially those night roosts when they're just digesting food.
Yeah, this is Kristen. Thanks, Tina. I was for the folks who are more in the know than I am also about the names of different bridge types. We've reviewed some of the literature on bats roosting in bridges as well. And, it seems like longitudinal joints that are typically found on parallel box beam bridges or cast in place, or even bridges made of pre-stressed concrete girder spans are often used by bats as day roosts. And then there are some other types of bridges that they might be using as a night roost, like the open girders tend to be more used as night roosts. Any other vertical concrete structures, yeah, definitely any cracks in concrete. It's really surprising for those of you who are going to be doing these inspections. It's really surprising the tight holes, or rather cracks, that bats can get in. So you might look at something and think, there's no way that a bat could get in there, especially if you're thinking of something like a big brown bat. But big brown bats are some of the largest bats out there. There are a lot of smaller bats, and they really squish themselves down when they get into these crevices. So it's unlikely that there's too many cracks that are too small for them.
Yeah, and that's a great point. I spend all summer talking to people who own log cabins, and the little cracks between the logs in a log cabin. It's really surprising how small those holes can be, and a bat still work its way through. They look very large when you see them on the wing when they're flying, but those wings are a big portion of their body, and once they fold those wings in and try to crawl into a crack, it doesn't have to be very big at all for them to get through it. So those are great points, Kristen. Thank you. So I see another question here about bats and rabies. That's a great question that I didn't touch on. So one of the points of this work is that we're not asking you guys to tell us what kind of bat you're seeing. We're in most cases not even asking you to touch the bats, mostly because of this question. Bats can carry rabies. They are one of those species one of those wildlife species in the state that do carry rabies, and we get detections every year of rabies in bats, and we ask that you definitely don't touch them. If there's a dead bat on the ground, you can certainly feel free to, I describe it as pick it up like a piece of dog poop, hand in the bag and wrap it up. But it's mostly live bats, and it's bats acting unusual that we worry about. So if you are at a bridge structure at 2 in the afternoon and there's a bat flying around, that might be something we would want to hear about. That might be a bat that's acting unusual. It might also just be a bat that was disturbed by something. And as far as, do most bats have rabies? That typically not. Bats do die from rabies, and we get, so if there is a possible human rabies interaction with bats, those bats go to the CDPHE for testing, the state rabies lab for testing. And a percentage of those that come in do test positive, but that is a percentage of the bats that are suspected to have interacted with humans. So when you're looking at the overall population of bats, it is probably not a very high percentage of bats on the landscape that have rabies, but rabies is still one of those diseases that we take very seriously when it comes to humans. All of our biologists that work with bats that do netting, they are vaccinated for rabies. I actually joke when I take my dog in for her shots that I just need to get my update and my new tag as well. So, it is certainly one of those diseases we take very seriously. The other thing you may hear about if you do any Googling is that you can get histoplasmosis from bat guano. In the cases of like that guano underneath a bridge, it's really not something you need to worry too much about. And most of the precautions when it comes to histoplasmosis are similar to that other rodent dropping one that it totally just fell out of my brain right now. You want to deal with it out in the open and that sort of thing. But my guess is in most cases, you're not going to be trying to clean up that guano underneath the bridges. So it's not a big concern. And all of us are wearing face masks right now anyway. So that's usually what we recommend when you're dealing with guano, is wear a face mask.
Hey, Tina, this is Kristen again. I just wanted to add to the sort of disease conversation that the Fish and Wildlife Service is also telling folks, and this is more in the situation when you would be doing active surveys where you could potentially be touching bats, which is not the case here, but they are advising that bats do not be handled because of COVID-19. Just like bats could give us rabies or any other diseases, we could also be transmitting diseases to them. And the Fish and Wildlife Service and the USGS their research laboratory are looking into whether bats can actually contract COVID-19 from humans. I definitely agree with Tina. Don't touch any bats while you're out there, even though they are super cute and you might be tempted.
Yeah, most of our biologists are really upset this year because we also have stopped all bat handling this summer. And for those who don't know, one of the theories behind SARS-CoV-2 COVID-19 is that it came out of bats in Southeast Asia, and we do not see this particular beta coronavirus in North American bats. But there is concern with bat handling that we as humans, as asymptomatic carriers of COVID-19, that we would potentially be able to introduce this beta coronavirus into bat populations in North America. And any chance we get to keep wildlife diseases from spreading around the country, we jump at that chance. So we have limited bat work this summer. Most of our biologists are just focusing on acoustic work because we can do that by putting a detector out on the landscape and recording the calls that the bats make. And most of the bat researchers that have to get permits through us, we've also kind of limited some of that activity as well. We are looking at that. Some of the information is starting to come out, and it's looking like that risk may be pretty small, and so that may change here in the near future. But for right now, we are limiting all of our bat handling activities. But again, if you do see a dead bat and there's, that's another kind of visual observation when you're at these bridges, especially with a maternity colony. You will often find that the baby bats lose their grip on the roost. When mom leaves to feed at night, she will leave the baby bat in the roost. And if the baby bat loses its grip or mom doesn't make it back because of an owl or a car or whatever, you may find baby bats on the ground. That's a great observation of there's a roost in this location, to see those on the ground. If you're seeing a lot of them, we may be interested in testing them just to make sure there isn't a disease going through the population. And if that were the case, handling a dead bat is not a huge concern when it comes to giving them coronavirus, because they're not going to do anything with it. It's also not a huge concern when it comes for rabies transmission, but we do still recommend wearing gloves or only picking the bat up with a bag. So I don't see any other questions in the chat. Does anyone else have anything?
Tina,
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, thank you. My name is Gabriel Cosleon. I'm with CDOT out of Region 2, southeast part of Colorado, out of Colorado Springs. Like many other things that CDOT does, we try to work with CPW to help wildlife passage and fish passage and whatnot. And I came in kind of late into the meeting, so I apologize. Is CPW maybe advocating is not the right word, but advocating at least for CDOT to try to incorporate features when we do bridge replacement projects or culvert replacement projects, to have certain features on those bridges that would be conducive for bat use. Just a question, just seeing what's out there in terms of, habitat changing in the landscape, and if there's a real desire and want for us to advocate for those features to be included in designs. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question, and it is definitely higher than my pay grade. What I would say at this point in time, what we're really trying to get our arms around is what is the level of use across the state of bridges by bats, and then what are those bridges that they really like. Most of the work that has been done when it comes to bats and bridges has happened in other parts of the country, and we are learning, especially because of white nose syndrome, we are learning that bats in the Northeast act different than bats in the Northwest, and they act different than bats in the Southeast. So, we don't see large winter roosts of our little brown bats in Colorado. We very seldom find more than like 5 or 10 in a winter roost. But when you go out into the Northeast part of the country, they were seeing roosts in the thousands, and so that of the same species. So one of the things we're just trying to get our arms around right now is what are those features that the bats are currently using, and then the long-term question of would we recommend that bridges have those types of features? Would we recommend that bridges with those types of features be maintained? Would we, those sorts of things? I think we would address that at a later date. But I think it's also going to be useful for you guys just to know if you need to do any repair work on a bridge. Do we have a large important maternity colony in that bridge? Then we can time that repair work at a point in the year where it would hopefully benefit the bats, or at least not disturb them as much. So right now it's mostly just information collecting, but I think as we collect more information, we'll be able to address some of those other questions about, does it make sense for both agencies to improve bridge habitat? And it could even be the point of suggesting if we need to take out a bridge that currently has a roost and put in a bridge that maybe wouldn't provide roosting habitat, could we put bat boxes up in the area so that the bats aren't using the bridge itself, but they still have a roost in that area because it seems to be important. So it's a little bit of a wishy-washy answer, but hopefully it helps.
That's okay. Thank you. I appreciate that. It's helpful. Thank you.
Was there someone else going to chime in with a question?
Yes, Tina, this is Jessica Martinez with CDOT Staff Bridge. More of a confirmation. Have you given Lynn Croswell the particular bridges that you've known to see bat presence at? So we can get that in our database? Or is it more something that you want to have? It's obviously something you want to have moving forward.
I have not. We could certainly do that. I'm assuming Jeff knows how to get in touch with, did you say Lynn?
Yes.
Okay.
Or I could take the information, whatever would be easiest.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'll need to pull up our database and just make sure I get a full reading of the bridges we know of.
Yeah, it looks like Lynn's on the call anyway.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yes.
I'm also here.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so I think we can certainly touch base, and I will get with our database guy and make sure we can pull that information out and certainly share it your guys' way.
Okay.
I know
Yeah,
I know
when you
Cinnamon
can.
has, yeah, I know Cinnamon has worked pretty closely with Dan over there on that US 6 bridge. I'm pretty sure you guys know about the tomb. We've known about that for years. But I'm not sure about any of the other ones across the state. So
Hey, Tina, this is
Yeah.
Jeff. If you give us information like that, do we treat that as sensitive, or is that something that can be put on public maps or whatever?
we typically treat bat roosts as kind of sensitive. We try not to share it too broadly, but that's typically because we're dealing with like abandoned mines or caves, which are kind of sensitive habitats themselves, or we're dealing with private lands. Yeah, I'm not sure. Let me think about that. Maybe it's a bit of a conversation between the two of us, because bridges are, I mean, we know they're there. They're public property. So yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. So I see another question came in. If you do find a dead bat, does CPW want you all to pick it up? If you're just seeing an individual dead bat, we really don't need that individual bat. What we're interested in are larger die-offs. So if you're seeing multiple dead bats, if it's someplace pretty easy to get to, you probably don't even need to grab them. You could just let someone at CPW know, and we will try to get someone out there quickly to pick them up and get them to our pathologist up in Fort Collins. If it's going to take a day to get back into the site, because it's out there in the middle of nowhere, it's the point I always like to make to people from other states, that some parts of Colorado aren't that easy to get to. It might be easiest if you pick it up, especially if you can keep it cool. Bats decompose pretty quickly, being small animals, so it can take a little while for to get out of a site, and we want to make sure that the bat is still in a useful state. The other thing about finding dead bats, if you find a number of dead bats at a site, something we might be interested in, but they look like they've been there a while, again, it's probably not worthwhile to pick them up. Especially this time of year, after about 24, 48 hours, there's not a lot we can test on those bats after that. They have dried out pretty significantly, so it's hard for us to get any testing off of that. But definitely let us know. And again, if you're seeing more than one or two, that's also a really good sign that there's a roost in that area. So, hopefully that answered that question for Laura. Cinnamon just wrote in the chat, previous inspection reports on the US 6 railroad overpass stated the presence of bats. So I think that one has been recognized by staff bridge. Not positive though. So yeah, I'll get with our database guy and see if we can pull out what bridges we know. And we should have UTMs. I'm pretty sure you guys probably have different sorts of ways of describing the bridges, but either descriptions or UTMs are what we should have. So yeah. Anything else?
Yeah, Tina, this is Mark Lawler, biologist with the DOT.
A quick question. If you can share where that large colony was in the San Luis Valley,
Yeah.
or just generally, I want to make sure that none of our roadways are near, make sure that biological assessments where I assert there's no hibernacular or anything nearby is accurate. That'd be really helpful.
Yeah, so that colony, it uses the Orient Mine. So the Orient Mine is an old, I believe it's an old copper mine. It's abandoned, and what they're actually doing as an outflight is they're coming through the glory hole on the top of the mine. It's really an amazing flyout, and the Orient Mine Land Trust now protects the property, and there's a little viewing area. You can go up there and watch them fly out. So it is in the northeastern part of the San Luis Valley, and it is by, you have to go through, the easiest way to get to it is to go through Valley View Hot Springs. And I like to point out to folks, if they are going to go up to the Orient Mine and they're going to go through Valley View, you should know, especially if you're taking kids, that it is a clothing optional hot springs. So you will at times see more wildlife than you expect. But it's a really, really amazing outflight, and it's also an amazing area because of that abandoned mine. They had a whole mining, a whole little town there around the mine, and there's still some old buildings and things that they've got signs up for. I can get you an exact location, but it's pretty far off any state roads. I think Valley View is at the end of a road. I don't think the road goes past Valley View.
That's great. No need for you to send me anything. I actually learn more if I look it up myself. It sounds like I can do that. And yeah, that's a relief, man. We have a widening project and all kinds of stuff going on in the valley right now. So I wanted to be comfortable with my determinations. Thank you for the presentation.
Yeah, and it's a pretty important roost to us. It's I was kind of give it a little bit of a him and a haw because it is a bachelor colony, and as we all know in the wildlife world, males are expendable. So but those bats, there was a study done a number of years ago. Those guys head out, and Brazilian free-tailed bats are one of our bigger bats, and they head out and feed on those agricultural pests in the valley, and they pretty much cover most of the valley when they go out every night. So just the agricultural benefit of having that roost there is huge for the valley. So any other questions? Well, thank you all for taking the time to listen to me yammer on about bats, and then kind of plod through my limited understanding of bridges. I'm really looking forward to what information you guys send my way, and then definitely we'll share our information back. And as I said earlier, you know, if you see anything out there, and when we follow up on those sites, if you want to come out and see bats, or if you just want to come out and see bats once we're trapping again, let us know, and we're happy to hook you up with our local biologists and get you out. It's pretty fun to be out there netting bats. Great way to spend an evening.
Hey Tina, this is Kristen again. I just saw another question in the chat asking about if anybody does find a dead bat, what they should do with it. Like, should it, does CPW have a pathology lab where that stuff would get sent, or yeah, what would be the next steps if they find a dead bat?
Yeah, so I thought I had addressed that one. Yeah, if you just find individual dead bats, we're really not super interested. You can just leave them there. If you find more than one, we usually say, you know, 6 to 10 is when we start getting interested. Definitely either, if it's hard to get to the site, it can be helpful to kind of pick them up, but you can also feel free to just leave them there and let CPW know, and we'll get some biologists or get someone out to the site and get them collected. We do have a pathologist up at our Fort Collins Wildlife Health Center, and so we try to get them up to her. The other thing when it comes to bats, especially this time of year, is they dry out pretty quickly, so we try to get on them as fast as we can. So yeah, definitely let us know. I shared my slides with Jeff, and hopefully he can send them out, and then he's also going to make this presentation available, a recording of it, and I will include my contact information in there. And so, you know, everyone can feel free to give me a holler. I'm really, that's what I'm doing right now, working from home, answering questions. So feel free to let me know, and I can forward any reports on to our local guys to follow up on and get those bats up to our pathologist if people find things.
Okay, there are no more questions then? They're dropping like flies. I think we're done here.
I see that.
But thank you all very much for being here, and thank you, Tina. That was very informative and really well done.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I look forward to this. Hopefully we find a number of great roosts across the state. It'll be wonderful.
Yeah.
So, thanks all. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you. You too.
Thanks, Tina.
Thank you.